Hey everyone, so it's Hearth and welcome back to my channel. On today's video, I'm starting a brand new series and I'm so excited about it. I'm going to be going through different witchcraft TV shows and movies to see which information they got right and where they got their information from. For today's video, we're kicking it off with one of my favourite TV shows ever, and that is The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Now, for any of you who don't know anything about The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the first season is based on the life of Sabrina Spellman, a half-witch, half-mortal, who needs to decide whether she's going to walk the path of light, which is the human life, or the path of night, which is the witchcraft life. She has to make a decision and undergo what's known as a dark baptism, where she signs the Book of the Beast, which is essentially the devil's book, which gives her the full witchcraft abilities that she currently doesn't have, being half human, half mortal. The show essentially surrounds her and her escapades as she dives further and further into the path of night. It's a really interesting show, and so much information is crammed into each of the episodes that I'm not even going to be able to fit all of them into each of these videos. Each video would probably be nearly 2 hours long, so I'm going to try and condense it down as much as I can. So for today's episode, we're going to be going through some of the things that Season 1, Episode 1 got right about witchcraft, and hopefully the additional information in this video will help you to develop your own magical practice in the real world a little bit more. Now, as is expected, I'm not going to be showing you the full episode in this episode. At best, it'll be a few screenshots and clips. And pre-warning, this is going to contain spoilers, so if you would like to watch the episodes as we're going along, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is available on Netflix. So with that all being said, let's get started. The idea of a dark baptism, signing your name in the Book of the Beast, and being anointed in blood in order to undertake this initiatory ritual isn't something that they pulled out of thin air. As far as I can tell from my research, this all actually comes from the confession of a Scottish witch or accused witch called Isabel Gowdy. I really hope I said her name right. I apologise if not. But in 1662 in Scotland, her confessions were documented, and they have become world famous. You can actually buy books that are a written documentation of her confessions, as well as the confessions of the accused witches around her. Now, the confessions of Isabel Gowdy were a little bit different from others that were seen during this time period. They contained words, phrases, and rituals that we hadn't seen anywhere else up until this point. One of these rituals included renouncing a Christian baptism. This was done by placing one hand above the head, one hand on the sole of a foot, and essentially claiming that everything between the two hands was no longer belonging to God. This is essentially a dark baptism, especially when it was seen through the eyes of the Christian church during this time period. It was an active rejection of all things holy and good, and therefore, for the local people, it was considered to be an acceptance of evil, of the devil, and of Satan. So this, I believe, is where the idea of this dark baptism comes from, and people will still do this to this day. It's not necessarily to say that you are working with Satan or the devil. Instead, for many people, it is a rejection of the religious faith that was placed upon you by others. Oftentimes, a baptism happens without your consent, as you are a very young child. You don't have a choice. And so many people do find it to be quite empowering to be reversing the actions of something that was done to you without your permission. And so many people still use this to this day. In her confessions, Isabel Gowdy also talks about signing the Black Book. Now, this is similar to the Book of the Beast. It is essentially a book where you sign your name away. Names were considered to have power. They still do to this day. This is why if you have the name of a spirit, a demon, a fair folk, it contains power and has the ability to control them. It's why taglocks within witchcraft include full names, as it's a way of having influence over another person. This signing of the Black Book was done to declare herself a follower of the devil and of Satan, and it also involved a blood ritual where a witch's mark on her shoulder was bitten by the devil himself, and her own blood was used to agree to a pact or contract with the devil. Now, it's important to remember that confessions were usually taken after torture, and especially during this time period, torture, even simple torture in the form of starving of liquids and food, was really commonplace. So we can't exactly take everything in this confession to be fact, but we can certainly take it as an interesting part of witchcraft history, and it seems like it's something that The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina really drew on. The show really is based on the idea of demonic witchcraft, of satanic witchcraft, not in the way that we would maybe see non-theistic Satanism today, but the way it was perceived to exist through the eyes of the Christian church a few hundred years ago. They also speak of joining a coven in the show. The entire point of carrying out the dark baptism in this show is not only for Sabrina to gain her full witch powers, but also to become a fully fledged member of the Church of Night, which is the coven at the center of this show. Now, the word coven actually wasn't used to associate with witches for many hundreds of years, and as far as I can tell, one of the first mentions of coven being used in relation to witchcraft is in Isabel Gowdie's Confessions, which I find really interesting, and it seems like they drew a lot on these confessions within the work. But I suppose that makes sense. Isabel Gowdie's Confessions are probably one of the most well documented in the British Isles, if not worldwide. Many times witchcraft confessions weren't written down, or if they were documented, they were severely altered, especially if they wanted to prove a point. While Isabel Gowdie's confessions have been altered, we see bits being tweaked and removed. For the most part, it's one of the most extensive witchcraft confessions that's been documented, and so it really is easy to draw on the information found within it. Another thing that gets brought up in the show is the idea that Sabrina needs to take a baptismal name. This is a name that she will take during her dark baptism, and it's something that's going to be significant to her. For the character, she chooses names that represent both of her parents, who in the show have sadly passed away. Now, the idea of a baptismal name isn't actually all that uncommon. Within witchcraft and neo-paganism, we see the idea of a taken name. Now, taken names are used for many different reasons, but they're often done when a person enters into witchcraft or when they first join a coven. Now, within a coven, you might find that the coven themselves picks the name for the individual, whereas in other cases, the individual will choose the name for themselves. A taken name is used for many different reasons. In a coven environment, it can be used to create anonymity. It allows someone to feel more comfortable in their spirituality and in their practice without having everyone know exactly who they are. It's also good if there are multiple people with the same first name in that group. So for instance, if there are multiple Daves, if each Dave has their own taken name that's different, it allows you to address each individual directly and everyone knows who you're talking to. So it can be really useful in that sense. Another reason you might choose to take a taken name is when you're working with spirits. Now, as I mentioned earlier, names contain power, and if someone or something knows your full name, they can use it in workings against you, and it is considered to be a very powerful thing to have. So for magical practitioners who do work with spirits on a regular basis, they may choose to have a taken name, a name that represents them as a magical practitioner but isn't used outside of the practice. This is especially significant if you are doing spirit summonings or spirit work with multiple people. That way, if different members of your group are addressing you, they aren't actively sharing your name with the spirits that might be residing within that space. For other people, a taken name is simply an empowering thing, and it usually represents the things that they feel drawn to and connected to. And for much of witchcraft history, it is seen as very taboo to be a part of the witchcraft practice. It was, even up until a few years ago in many areas, but still to this day in many others, a really negative thing if other people find out that you're practicing witchcraft. And so often people will choose a taken name as a way of giving themselves a little bit more privacy as a magical practitioner. Because sadly, people still lose their jobs, they lose their friends, they lose their family if people find out that they're a practicing witch or another member of the magical community. So oftentimes, taken names are really important for that reason as well. Not everyone chooses to have a taken name, and often taken names will change as you progress in your magical practice. So what you choose at 18 isn't necessarily going to be what you use when you're 65. You can adapt it as time goes on, just as long as you feel comfortable with what you're using. Another focal point for episode 1 is the idea of Sabrina getting her familiar. Now, initially, her aunts do give her a book that goes through all of the potential familiars that she could have, including dogs and hedgehogs, toads and spiders. There are so many options within this universe, and you can choose a pre-existing familiar. Now, they do emphasize in this show that familiars are not animals. They are a spirit in the form of an animal. The actual wording in the show goes as follows: goblins who have taken on the form of animals to better serve their human masters. It's one thing that I really appreciate about this show. They have done a lot of research on the history of certain topics, and I can see that as a magical practitioner. Familiars are spirits who have entered into a contract or a pact with a witch or magical practitioner. Their purpose is to help protect the magical practitioner from harm, and also to assist the witch in their workings, often working spiritually or astrally while the human works energetically and physically. They can be a wonderful aid for a magical practitioner, and you'll often find that practitioners will have several familiars throughout their lifetime. Familiars are non-human spirits, and usually the pact is mutually beneficial. It isn't necessarily, as the show says, that the human is their master, but more the fact that they're in a symbiotic relationship. Each party is gaining something out of it. The witch is gaining protection and assistance, but so is the familiar. Spirits don't necessarily have it all rosy and sunshines. Sometimes their life can be really difficult, and the witch gives them additional security and protection. They also give them offerings and energy that allows them to sustain themselves more fully. Not every spirit is going to want to become a familiar, but there are many spirits who do enjoy being the familiars to witches, and it is a mutually beneficial pact. So it isn't that you forced a spirit to work with you, but you've both come to this equal conclusion. And so you will often seek out a spirit that has the desire to be in this familiar human interaction. And that's something that we see on the show as well. Sabrina actually goes out into the woods rather than choosing a familiar out of a book, and she calls out for a spirit that would like to work with her in this way. Now, this ritual is actually one of the most interesting things I saw in this episode, as it's so closely linked to how it's done in real life. So she goes out to the woods with a bell, and she starts by ringing this bell. Then she draws a sigil or symbol onto the ground, and she announces verbally into the woods what her desired outcome is, that she would like a spirit to work with her and be her familiar. She then rings the bell again and goes to leave. This ritual is actually so good, you could probably adapt this for your own working. Often, when we are working with spirits, we will ring a bell. This is essentially a calling card to say, I am wanting to interact and work with you. Bells in witchcraft are used for many different things. Some people use them for cleansing. I personally use them for calling forth spirits. And so I will ring a bell to make everyone around aware that I am talking to the spirits and I want to interact with them. The sigil is drawn on the ground. This could be your familiar's sigil, which is something that is often done when creating a pact with familiars. You will draw a sigil on a piece of paper or on the floor, or in this case, out in the woods with a stick in the ground, and that is the sigil for creating a pact with a spirit to become your familiar. And then you announce it out that you would like a spirit that is interested in becoming your familiar to come to you. Now, it is important in the real world not to just accept any spirit that comes your way, because you don't necessarily know what their intentions are, so you would want to spend time with that spirit in the astral while journeying, and then over time you will build up that relationship until you decide it's time to form that pact and agreement. Because just like having a business partner, you really want it to be the right fit. And then, before you leave, after you've announced to the world and the spirit, you will ring the bell again as a way of closing off that communication. You have said your piece to the spirits, and now you are closing it off by ringing that bell around you, and then you can go home. And ideally, you're going to want to be going home a different way than you came, preferably walking a kind of convoluted path. Some people will also choose to cover their hair or their head when they are working with spirits. That is another option as well. It's not one that I personally do, but I know that a lot of people do that within the witchcraft community. One of the main differences between the show and real life when it comes to familiars is how that familiar presents. So later on in the evening, this spirit, or goblin as they refer to it in the show, enters Sabrina's room. It's a very creepy, dark figure with a long tail and beady eyes, and then it transforms itself into a black cat, which is what many people would know of as Salem if you watched the original Sabrina TV show. Now, this is slightly different to how familiars are in real life. Familiars usually reside within what's known as a spirit vessel or a spirit house. It's essentially an item that is home to your familiar, and that is where it will reside when it is not doing its job, and that is also where you will give it offerings. Familiars usually don't take physical form in this way, but in some instances they can attach themselves onto other things, such as animals. So essentially you might have your cat, which then has the non-human spirit attached onto it. So it's essentially two spirits in one animal. But this is fairly uncommon, and for a lot of magical practitioners it kind of crosses that line as to whether something is suitable to do or not. Most of the time when you're working with familiars, you're going to be using a spirit house or vessel. Now in the show, Salem, her familiar, actually protects her from harm. And this is something that also happens in real life, just in a slightly different way. So in the show, one of the main antagonistic characters sends a golem-type creature at her. It's essentially a puppeteered spirit, so it's an object that has been brought to life and is being controlled by another witch. That isn't something that's real in real life, by the way. You're not going to be able to make a scarecrow come to life and chase someone, but the idea of puppets and golems is something I'm going to touch on in future episodes of this series. What does happen, however, is that Salem, her familiar, protects her from harm against a spiritual force. This happens in the real world, especially if the familiar is very protective or defensive over the person that they're working with. You will find that familiars, much like servitors, ancestors, and guides, will offer spiritual protection from any negative workings or spiritual attacks that come your way. They can also help cleanse away negative energies and remove spirit attachments. Now, it isn't going to be as dramatic as what is seen in the show, and oftentimes a magical practitioner won't even notice that it's happening, but your familiar may well come to your aid if you really need it. The Weird Sisters are a trio of characters that come up time and time again throughout this series, but primarily in the first and second seasons. The Weird Sisters actually come from Macbeth. Anyone who's interested in Shakespeare will likely recognise their characters, but within this show, they are very cruel to Sabrina. They don't want Sabrina to be a part of the Church of Night, and so they do undertake curses on Sabrina. They actually undertake a blood curse. Now, blood curses are a little unusual within witchcraft, though they can happen, much like generational curses. They attach themselves onto your genetics and your blood, so that means that any children that you may have, it will also be passed on to them as well. This is pretty uncommon in the real world, mostly because it takes a huge amount of energy, intention, and honestly, it's really not worth it. Most magical practitioners will find a way of bettering themselves as a way of getting back to someone who's caused them harm. Most won't choose to do this kind of working, as it just takes so much of your life away. It just takes up so much time. But curses do exist, and the one within this TV show is actually pretty interesting. At first, Sabrina thinks it is a simple curse and she can just wash it away. So when she gets to school, she goes to the showers, which is weird, by the way. When I went to school, we didn't have any showers in like the normal school bit. We had showers in like the pool area, but not like in the building. Is this a common thing in America? I would love to know. But regardless, she goes into the shower and she repeats a chant to herself to wash away the curse, and she uses the fresh water to do this. This is something that actual magical practitioners do, and it's something I do almost every single time I have a shower. The basis of this is really simple. You stand under the water and you visualize the water as washing away any negativity, negative energy, unwanted magical attachments. You visualize it washing it away. Now, you don't have to see this in your mind's eye if you aren't able to do that. Just think it and know it. For me, I typically will visualize the water as being an electric blue, like a neon blue, and it pours over me and it takes all of that black energetic gunk and it washes it down the drain. Some magical practitioners will also enlist the use of chants or repeated spells that they will carry out and they will repeat while this working is taking place as a way to wash minor energies and attachments off you. Now, of course, this doesn't work for anything really big and large, and this is what Sabrina found when she realized the curse hadn't actually been lifted. Her aunts then do a reading for her to see whether she actually has a curse cast upon her or not. Now, the reading in the TV show is an egg reading. This is a type of reading that is actually done, though usually it's not quite as gruesome as it is on the show. On the show, the egg is cracked and the inside is all red and bloody. This is something that can happen in real life, particularly in extreme curse situations, but most of the time it's about the bubbles and the strands and the buoyancy of the egg, and that's really how you get that reading. It's less about it being blood red or not. When Sabrina finds out that she's actually being cursed, she is prescribed a series of herbs, and she's also told to go and take salt baths, which is actually a way to help remove curses and negative intentions. Salt is a powerful purifier and cleanser. It's often used to protect from harm and also to remove it from your body, your mind, and your spirit. Salt baths and other ritual-style baths are often used before spell work and ritual as a way of cleansing away any unwanted energetic attachments that might then negatively influence the working you're about to carry out. And it's a really commonplace step, and usually the first step when it comes to undoing or washing away curses. Usually it's repeated for several nights over several weeks alongside other rituals and spells as a way of lifting and removing that curse from you. So it's just another thing that this TV show got right, and it's kind of bananas to me how much research they did for this show and also for the graphic novel comics that it's based off. I will usually watch a witchcraft-themed TV show or movie and be really deeply disappointed by the inaccuracies. I understand it's a TV show, it's not a documentary, but sometimes people will believe the things that they see, and it causes people like me and other members of the witchcraft community problems when so many of the things are completely inaccurate and or dangerous. Whereas in this show, they seem to have done so much good research. Of course, not everything is accurate, and it's been elaborated on for the purpose of the show. Still pretty darn good though. During the show, we also see Sabrina having some altercations with her principal, a man whom no one likes and is really difficult to deal with, and so it's recommended to her that maybe she tries to deal with him, and also that he's deathly afraid of spiders. Sabrina then takes this information and plans to undertake a ritual to help remove him from his position for just a few days, just the few days that she needs him away to be able to put something through with the vice principal. She calls upon her cousin Ambrose, who is a fully fledged member of the Church of Night, in order to carry out a spell to remove him from his position temporarily. This spell includes a photograph of the principal, which is used as a taglock. Now, taglocks are something that is found within real witchcraft. They are used to represent an individual if that person cannot be there. Other taglocks include blood, saliva, nail clippings, hair clippings, full names, dates of birth, signatures, pieces of clothing, items that belong to them, and also photographs. And so a photograph from the school magazine is taken and is used within this working to manifest that spell in the life of the principal. Can you see why I like this show now? There is so much good information in here that really, once you've done your research on it, you can adapt into your own workings. It is absolutely nuts to me. This spell also involves her aunt's familiars, which are spiders, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to familiars. Familiars can be used to directly target people. Now, a lot of the time, magical practitioners won't do this. It's something that for many people, it will cross the line. But it is something that can be done, especially if the practitioner does need protection from said person, or in some cases, if that practitioner wants to negatively influence a person. In this particular spell that was done, we see a spider cage, essentially, with a whole bunch of spiders in it, and we see a photograph being used as well as some chanting. The purpose of this is to have the familiars interact with the person the taglock represents. Now, this isn't going to be physical like it is in the show. Instead, it's going to be spiritual, energetic. So, rather than affecting the person while they're awake, it will probably instead affect the person while they are asleep. If in this case, you want your familiar to take on the form of spiders, it would instead infiltrate someone's dreams, negatively influencing their sleep and giving them nightmares where spiders were involved. During their waking life then, when they're very sleep deprived and they're within this liminal space between being awake and being asleep, they may then also start seeing spiders in their waking life if they're incredibly deprived of sleep or if they are under the influence of some kind of substance such as alcohol. These kind of things are done by magical practitioners on occasion, usually though they're done as a form of defense rather than an antagonistic approach, but every magical practitioner is different, and so some will do this purposefully. This can also be done with other spirits that you're working with and servitors, so it is something that can be done in that way. But generally, it was a really interesting part of this episode, as the ritual itself is fairly accurate to real life. Obviously, the outcome is different, but the working itself, that's pretty good. And although there were so many more things within this episode I could touch on, I only wanted to focus on the really significant things. And the last one from this episode was all about the Malum Malice. Now in the show, the Malum Malice is an apple that is taken from the oldest apple tree in the orchard, and it is said to be able to offer you wisdom and information on a question that you would like to gain answers to. Now, the idea behind this is that the oldest tree in an orchard will have the most memories, the most life experience, and so it will then have more insight on what is potentially to come. After all, things do repeat themselves and patterns do continue on. So Sabrina goes to an orchard, and there she finds the oldest tree in the orchard, thinks about the question that she would like to gain an answer to, and takes a bite. There she is transported psychically into a different place where she will gain answers to her question. Now, in her vision, she sees members of her community historically that have been sadly killed for practicing witchcraft. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because YouTube really won't like it. What I will say though is that the means of this has been done accurately to the time period. Most people will assume that witches were burned. This wasn't done in most areas, especially in North America and Britain. It was primarily done on the continent of Europe because witches were tried for a different reason. But in this, they do depict it in a more accurate way. What I more wanted to touch on though was the use of apples as a form of divination. This is something that we see time and time again. It has been carried out for hundreds of years and it continues to be carried out to this day. Many people will overlook apples, but they are often associated with love, fertility, abundance, prosperity, and divination, and many practitioners will use them for such in their magical practice today. It is said that if you were to peel the apple skin off in one smooth motion and then throw the skin over your shoulder into a vat of water, the letter it would spell out is the first letter of your soulmate's name. These kind of practices revolving divination for love have been seen for a very long time, and there's a reason today why we still bob for apples on Samhain. Apples have a very deep history as being associated with witchcraft, especially through the eyes of the Christian church, hence Adam and Eve taking a bite of the apple. They're often deeply associated with witchcraft. Whether for accurate reasons or not, it is very deeply ingrained. And all in all, this show is probably one of my favorites when it comes to witchcraft. I absolutely love it. If you do have any other series or movies that you would like me to do in the future, please let me know in the comment section. Let me know what your favorite thing from this episode was. Was there something that I missed over that you really enjoyed? Let me know that in the comments as well. If you did like this video, feel free to comment or leave a like. It means a lot to me, and it also lets me know which videos you like, and it helps YouTube know that you like this content and would like to see more of it. If you do enjoy the magical content on this channel or in this episode, feel free to hit subscribe. I post magical content every single week. So with that being said, I hope you have a marvelous magical day. I hope you're all staying safe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye! Oh my god! I love that episode. Holy shit! Oh, I have wanted to film this series for 2 years, and I haven't done it, and I'm so excited! Oh. This is probably the most excited I've been in an episode for a very long time. Did I actually finish any of those words? I'm not quite sure. I'm so excited. Oh my god, I love... Does anyone else do this with like long jackets and like jumpers and stuff? It's so satisfying. Oh my god, I'm so excited. Okay, I need to charge my battery and then I have another episode to film today, so... Oh, my hands kind of come out of this one.